Evaluating OERs is an essential step to make sure that the materials that we're selecting for our courses enhance student learning and honestly align with our syllabi. So this is the third and final session on OERs, and we're really glad you were able to join us today. So just to give a brief little overview, first we're going to do a brief little recap of what we've discussed in the last two sessions. Then we're going to dive into the importance of evaluation and why it matters and how it impacts the learning experience. We're also going to take a look at specific OER evaluation criteria so that you kind of know what you're looking for when you assess the quality of your resources. And then finally, we're going to introduce some evaluation tools that we have, such as like checklists and rubrics to help you evaluate these resources that you select. Hey, Amber, how are you? It's good to see you. I know we have a small group. It is, last week of the 7 weeks, right? If you could, though, what is one type of OER? Even if you weren't with us the last few sessions, that's okay. If you could think of a type, or maybe even where you could find an OER. Ooh, a video with Edpuzzle. Yeah, YouTube videos. Lots of these videos online are OERs, and then we can kind of remix them to make them our own. A textbook, ebook, absolutely. One of my favorites, because I spend more time than I should admit in Canva, is even music, sounds, things like that. Pictures, photography. There's a lot of different types of OERs, online courses that we've kind of looked at over the last few sessions. So I'm going to do a brief recap. I see a lot of familiar faces, so thank you guys for continuing to join us. So the last two sessions, we did discuss in general, what were OERs? That was the big part. Then where can we find them? And how do we cite them? To give credit to where credit is due. So our brief recap, OERs do provide free or low cost access to course resources and materials. It really helps promote the equity and inclusivity in education because we want to make sure that all students have access to quality materials. When we think about one of the questions we asked in a previous week about like, what's the cost of your textbook? And some people shared like in the hundreds. And we also shared some statistics that students were making hard decisions to buy food or buy their school materials. And that's a hard reality. And open educational resources can help us close that gap. OERs are also openly licensed. This means that they could be free to use, sometimes modify, and even share. There's different types of licenses that we've discussed over the last couple of weeks, and based on the license, it lets you know what you can do with it. And OERs, I was guilty of this myself. I always assumed it was just an online textbook. For example, OpenStax, a popular repository. But there's actually so many different types of OERs that we've mentioned already. It can include videos, music, pictures, articles, textbooks, open courses. There's so many things out there. And we know that sometimes it takes a little effort on our part to locate them. So in summary, we know open educational resources are great for our students and they can help save costs. And it's just kind of finding what fits where. So the types that we discussed that first session as well, I've touched on briefly. It includes like articles that they can find that are scholarly research. A lot of articles that researchers are publishing now have a CC BY license, which is incredible. So imagine pulling those into your course for different activities, formative assessments, or even mentioning some case studies. Online courses, you can think of them sometimes as MOOCs and things like that. It's online for students to access at their own pace, usually asynchronously and free of charge. And there's even things such as supplementary papers, worksheets, activities that can go along with lessons you're already doing. One of the great places, and I'm going to show on the next slide, is OER Commons. That is a great OER repository. There's also places like OpenStax and other textbooks online. And there's even some cool tools like Lumen. I know our math department leverages Lumen quite a bit already. So it's that engaging online experience for formative checks for understanding as well. Then last week, the last little topic we discussed was how to give credit to the rightful owners. And I always equate this to when we teach our students to cite scholarly sources in their writing, like their APA, their MLA. When we use openly licensed resources, we still need to give their CC by license. So that includes their title, the author of it, if it's known, the source, and what type of license does it have, because some can be remixed, aka modified, and some are simply non-derivatives, meaning you can't change it, but you can still share it out. So that is the last 2 weeks or last two sessions in a crash course. We do have the recordings for all of these, and we'd love to answer any questions at the end if you have them. I'm going to hand it over to my lovely friend, Laura.
Hi there. How are you today? Welcome back, everyone. Glad to see you again. We're going to start exploring evaluation because it is important when it comes to OERs, but evaluation is something that we use anytime we're adopting materials that we're using for our class. We want to make sure we read that article before we decide that it's appropriate for our course, or we want to make sure that we've reviewed that textbook before we decide that it's the one that we want to use for our course. So this really isn't a practice that's any different, but we want to have a good idea of the value and what we have in front of us in our OERs. So we're trying to ensure that every resource that we choose meets standards, contributes positive to the learning environment. And this is a nice quote that talks about quality that's being measured through a quality assurance process. And the measurement process provides those tangible benchmarks to evaluate the quality. So this is using rubrics or other evaluative tools so that we can make sure that we have a real idea of the value of whatever resource it is that we're using. So here's some importance of evaluating the OERs. We want to ensure quality and relevance. It's true that sometimes there might be higher quality OERs than other times, but we have the same thing with published textbooks. So even just because it comes from McGraw-Hill doesn't mean that it's perfect, right? However, now we're seeing that McGraw-Hill is dipping their toes into OERs as well. So, we have all kinds of things, these crossover kinds of things happening. One of the primary reasons that we do want to evaluate these resources is to ensure that quality. And we're trying to develop those processes that we can use to confirm that materials meet academic standards and align with our learning objectives. And we want to evaluate it regularly. One of the nice parts about OERs is that they can be updated and the links will lead to those updated materials. But as they're updated, we want to make sure that we have reviewed them. We want to have kind of a maintenance schedule that we've determined so that we are looking at it if in case a chapter changed or a topic, the way a topic was approached within a chapter changed from what we had thought it would be. So we were approaching it a certain way. And this is important anyway, because we want to make sure that our courses are up to date every time we run them. It can be tempting that if it's one that we've run 2 semesters before, and every semester that we just say, oh, we'll just turn it on and everything will be fine. But we do need to check the links. We need to check the videos. We need to check that everything is still functioning and that it's still as up to date as it could be. So when we're ensuring this quality and relevance, we're making sure that it's current and relevant to our target audience. And we're making sure that all of our resources are evaluated this way. We also want to look at equity and accessibility of resources. So we're evaluating our OERs when we're fostering that equity and accessibility in education. By evaluating our resources, we can ensure that diverse perspectives and needs are addressed, and we can promote inclusivity in our learning materials. It's vital that these resources that we select meet accessibility standards, such as Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. We lovingly call that WCAG. And this makes learning materials available to all students, including those with disabilities. So you can hear in this, the equity and accessibility side, we're trying to make sure that we are respecting the diversity of our students in their in all of these characteristics of our students, but we're also trying to make sure that our materials are accessible in case students have any barriers to learning. So this is a multifold, but especially at least a twofold effort. And then we're looking at how we use these to enhance teaching and learning outcomes. So one of the things that sometimes when we are designing a course, it can feel like we have to follow along with the textbook, whether it's an OER or whether it's a printed textbook. But we feel like the first thing we do should be chapter 1, and the second thing we do should be chapter 2. So it's recognizing that sometimes what's best for our students might be out of order, where we'd actually do a chapter 1, a chapter 4, and then maybe that text doesn't really help us with the third topic that we'd like to study. So we might have other materials that augment, enhance that learning experience for our students so that we best serve the students we have in front of us. So it's important that we foster a culture that evaluation promotes continuous improvement, because we want to be able to see this as a partner, as a tool, as we're evaluating our materials to make sure that the education we're offering our students is the best that it can be.
Thanks, Laura. And to add to that, I think of this, I've, been in education myself, and I have been guilty of, here, Jenna, here's your math textbook. This is what you're teaching. And, getting out of that habit to realize, okay, maybe this chapter isn't great. Maybe I can go find an OER that communicates this message better for my students. It's kind of retraining ourselves to think outside of the box a little bit. So we're going to shift gears and talk about the criteria that we use when we're evaluating OERs. So in this next section, it's going to help us identify the key elements that we should focus on when we're reviewing materials to include in our course. Think of this in general, whether it's OERs or you're selecting a curriculum or a textbook or a software or a resource. What criteria would you look at to evaluate? What's something you could consider before you made that commitment to that resource? Accuracy. Alice, absolutely. And it's funny because coming from the world of math, I have seen so many textbooks and even OERs that have made mistakes, to be honest with you. There are inaccuracies across all resources, which is why we need to evaluate them. And publication date, absolutely. Some subjects may not evolve as often as others, but a lot of the courses that we have here, they are ever evolving. They're changing with the times, with new things happening in our society and world. So accuracy and publication date are huge. I really like those call outs. Thanks, guys. So we've kind of looked at these into 3 main areas: fit, source quality, and accessibility. And we're going to define accessibility as a broader topic. I know typically when I refer to accessibility, I'm referring to the digital accessibility, but we're going to also look at it in terms of just increasing access beyond just disabilities, which many may associate it with. So for fit, we're looking at how well the course aligns with, how well the resource aligns with your course and also your learners. Because let's be real, when we select something, we may not need all 10 chapters of this OER on OpenStax. Maybe we only need chapter 2 and chapter 7, and then I'm going to pull something else. So one of the buckets we look at is the currency and relevance. We ask ourselves, is it current? Does it align with our learning outcomes and our syllabus? And is it engaging and interactive? So I actually played devil's advocate with Laura about this yesterday because, content should be engaging. I absolutely agree. But then I also have great faith in our instructors, and you guys are the key to that engagement and interaction. Like your learning activities is what helps bring things to life. We also consider, are there multiple formats available? I know as a learner, I like to print things out and highlight it. I am not the read on the screen kind of learner. So does your resource have different ways that it can be shared with your student depending on their learning preference? And then finally, of course, inclusivity and diversity. Is it free of bias? Is it supporting diverse learners? Does it have diverse cultures and backgrounds represented in the material? These are, I think, honestly, things that you would consider when you select any type of resource for your course, whether it's an OER or a paid item. Now, source quality. Oh my gosh, quality is such a subjective term, right? What I perceive as quality versus my student versus Laura versus a different instructor. I mean, that is a really hard word to define. So, we're going to define it as looking at its credibility and reliability. So, for example, when I look at an OER, I'm going to look at the authors. Is it peer reviewed? Who are these people? Can I look them up? Can I see on ResearchGate other things that they've contributed to? I want to make sure they're reputable. We also look at the content quality and objectivity. For example, is it professional? Is it free of errors? And is it free of bias? You want to make sure that it's a neutral standpoint. And I know that sometimes can be hard, especially when we have our own biases we bring to the table. And then finally, does it support active learning? Once again, I know that's a loaded statement because I know our instructors bring our content to life. So sometimes your OER might have that built in automatically. And sometimes it might be something that you're aware of that, like, hey, this is kind of like straight to the point content. So, what can I do as an instructor to make it more engaging for my students? And then finally, accessibility. Does it comply with the accessibility standards that we are required to follow? And does it have a reasonable cost, and is it available to students? Meaning, is it free? Is it low cost? Can they find it on the internet? Is it something that can be exported to a Word document that they can maybe print out? And I know our lovely librarians have even discussed, helping with that component as well. There are ways to get these items printed out. I know some departments have essentially made their own textbooks, to be honest with you. So they're not necessarily free, but they're an extremely low cost. And then finally, the user experience. So if I'm using an online platform as like a supplement or a main source of text, is it intuitive to use? Will my students know how to use it? And also, it kind of goes back to that digital accessibility. I can ensure my content I create is accessible, but I'm also charged with making sure that resource is accessible as well. And we have some things coming down the road to help you with that, about what is accessible, what is not accessible, what does that look like, and how do you determine it? So stay tuned for future sessions in the spring. All right, Lara.
Well, and interestingly enough, to add to what you had just said, Jenna, Alice and Netta might comment on this, I'm not sure, but it is my belief that it is the policy of the library that you can print out things there, no charge. So students, if they had something they needed to print, they could go to the library to be able to print those. And the main reason I point that out is it was not like that for me. We paid even a nickel a page, but that adds up. So it's a huge benefit. And I think it's nice for us to help kind of spread the word for students who might need to take advantage of that. Now we'll move into evaluation resources. So now we've told you, okay, here are some things that you look at. But I also had mentioned before, thinking about a tool that helps guide your evaluation. We have a few tools that we can talk to you about here that could provide you some success. Two of them are homegrown right here at Delaware Tech. And then we have another one also that you could decide between you or your department, which one works best for your purposes of evaluating these OERs. So here's one that's Delaware Tech's OER evaluation checklist. It's in a Google Doc form. So this is also maybe preference about how you would want to interact with your checklist. Of course, you could always print it out and make check marks as well, but it could be used online. This is linked into our resource guide as well, so that it provides you some support for determining that fit, source quality, and accessibility, and how you might evaluate that. There's some little descriptions in there to help you think about. So you can kind of consider this a rubric, right, of how you might be able to have shared vision of evaluating OERs. The next one is another Delaware Tech product. It's an OER evaluation checklist as well, but this is a Google Sheet. So maybe you like Google Sheets, and this is another way that you'd like to do it. You'll also see that there are some differences between the two tools. So they speak to you a little bit differently. And for instance, this one, it also has something at the top. It says OER goal. So it's important when we're evaluating whatever open educational resource it is that we're trying to think about, well, why do we want to use this? What do we need this for? So we don't want to just check a box and say, yeah, now I've got an OER. Okay, good. We want to make sure that it does something and that it's accomplishing the goals that we have for our students, for their ability to learn the material, to apply the material, to help with their learning overall. And this one, as you'll see, there are some different maybe descriptors. You'll see a lot of similarity, but there might be some differences as well. And a lot of it is, again, in that approach, Google Sheet versus Google Doc. But this helps speak to different types of minds that would want to evaluate these resources. And we have one more. This one's from Western University. It's a rubric for e-learning. This is also linked into that reference guide, but it provides, and this one, calls itself a rubric, but it provides a tool that can help evaluate e-learning tools, and it's designed for higher education, which is nice as well. You might find other ones out there, but they may not be geared towards higher ed. So this is kind of a nice one. And it helps you realize that not all of the rubric criteria are necessary, but you'll want to find as many as you possibly can. Or if there are some issues, for instance, we talked about accessibility a lot. If there are some issues with accessibility with the tool, you want to try to figure out what alternatives can you offer that would make that particular part of the tool more accessible to more of your students. And when I'm talking about accessibility in that situation, I am particularly talking about those disabilities or needs for accommodations. But you could also think about it as that availability when you're housing that in the word accessible, to make sure that the link would work for the majority of students and that there wouldn't necessarily be, maybe there's a sign in or maybe there's not. You have to be able to prepare them that they have to create an account or they don't. So there's some different considerations that you might have for those e-learning tools as well. But here's 3 ideas for you so that you could have a tool to help you with this valuable task of evaluating your OERs.
And Laura, can I add, because you made a really good point that I think it's almost unreasonable to think that every resource is going to check every box. I mean, I know when I was teaching algebra, some chapters we just skipped over because we knew it wasn't right and I supplemented on my own. So when we're evaluating OERs in any course material, it's okay for us to say that this criteria is not met, but here's what I'm going to do instead. Here's my alternative, whether it's for accessibility or because it's not relevant or it's outdated or it's just inaccurate. So keeping that flexible mindset, because I know I've been guilty of that myself, that if it's not perfect, I'm not even going to waste my time. But the reality is, I don't think we'll find any perfect resource out there, OER or publisher, that we could implement here.
So you might recall, if you have been able to come to all 3 of these sessions, we did have these images, except we did change one. You might recall this image, but if this has been your first OER session, it's okay too. It's fine. After this session or after the whole series, how are you feeling about OERs? Please use an adjective, and you can either unmute or you can type it in the chat that helps describe. These pictures are for inspiration, but determine the adjective that fits you, the word that describes how do you feel about OERs right now at this point in time, snapshot picture.
I think I could do mine. I could even do this one because there's so many out there. And I know even myself, sometimes I have to pause and realize, where can I go find this resource and is it of value? Because I do get like this sometimes, a little mind blown.
Oh, mind blown. That's the word.
Yeah, that would be my adjective. I love to hear that, Katie. Katie, I'm going to put you on the spot. Is there a particular type of OER you love the most or use the most?
Well, I love them because they're so accessible to students. And I was a student at one time too. And so the fact that, like Laura was saying, I did have to pay 5 cents a copy, and I like to have tangible things in front of me. So you could either read it, and other people like to like scroll on their phone or read it. So like it gives a different for different types of learners also. I don't know if it was addressed in a different, this is the first one I've been able to go to, but for different types of learners, I feel like it's good, and you can blow it up and you can read it or you can make it smaller. You can just have it anywhere you want. And with students traveling and doing everything that they do, between work, sometimes they could, have their phones out at work and read through it if they're slow, or sometimes, just having the paper itself is too hard. And books are bulky and books are confusing. And when you're reading the OERs, I also like that you can Google something else quicker because more quickly. I'm math. Sorry, everyone.
That was
But
perfect.
because like you'll know exactly what they're talking about. Like if they use some kind of a word, you can just use that to Google what you're looking for. Or even I put those words into ChatGPT to be like, what does this word mean when they say this, like in the sentence? And then it gives me another version of what I'm looking for or looking at. And I just think it's easier to just copy and paste than try and figure it all out yourself. So OERs are, I think, really important.
I love that. It's a good inspiration. It's a good starting point, maybe. I
Yeah.
love that. And we have a couple others. Continued interest, very interested. And Alice, you make a good point. We are all kind of charged with reviewing and evaluating this stuff. I think it would be naive of us not to say that. I think it goes with anything that we use here is we have to have a critical eye and make sure it's right for our students. Awesome.
Jenna, real quick, I wanted to ask Marcia what she meant if she wanted to expand on continued interest, what she meant about that.
Well, I missed the second session, so I don't want to say I'm lost, but I'm still learning that piece about the permissions. And I don't know if you ever get it down packed. But I'm just very cautious about, okay, what am I supposed to do with this, and how am I supposed to, acknowledge this, and so that's still fuzzy for me. So that's why I say continued issue. I agree with everyone else that it's for the students. I think it's wonderful. I am the print out the paper highlighter type person too, but I think from the student perspective, again, they don't have to carry around those books. They can just, go with it. And so I think it's definitely a plus. I think I don't want to say absolutely better, but it just has a lot of pros. Yeah. So, but I just want to know how to use it accurately. I don't want any strange emails or certified letters or,
We'll put the video up, and you can always reach out to either one of us or to librarians for help with this also for how to use them.
Yeah. And Marcia, on our last session's like resource guide, and we'll make sure it's linked on our website. There's also like a little key of like if it has this image, this license, here's what you're
Right.
allowed to do with it.
I
So we'll
remember
make sure.
that. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. That's awesome. I'm really glad you called that out because I'm the same way, right? I'm guilty of years ago, right? Go to Google, find a picture, copy and paste and use it. And now I'm way more educated about the intellectual property and things around that. So it's nice that we all learn, we all grow, and we figure it out. That's awesome. But congratulations on making it through the first 7 weeks. We're about the halfway part.
Thank you for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks for
Alice.
having us.
Bye, Marcia.